I'm also delighted to be here. I've been here a couple times in the last few years. I tagged along on the Future of Design conference with my partner, Yoon, and we were here a couple years ago for the Charles and Ray Eames lecture, so I feel like it's a little bit familiar here, so thank you for having me back again. The hypothesis presented by this conference is that the reconsideration of history might allow it to play an operative role in design, allowing it to regain a kind of agency as a productive and projective tool. Speaking as a designer, not as a historian, I feel cast in the role of informer, or at least as test subject, here to report on the latent role of history within design practice. History is not overtly present in our work. I would say it's not a source of inspiration or antagonism, and we're not particularly concerned with its legitimizing referentiality. At the risk of presenting myself as the amnesiatic practitioner alluded to in the panel's description, I would offer that history itself is evolving, mutating, and becoming something new. History is present in practice, but it's diffuse and distributed, not as questions of continuities and discontinuities, sources and recuperations, but as a methodology of design, one that is always already wired into the self-consciousness about practice. The contemporary condition is characterized by not having a dominant or master narrative, and also not a dominant conflict, white versus gray, modern versus postmodern. It is characterized by a multiplicity of positions, but also an ambivalence or permissiveness towards issues of style, form, pattern, and technique. I would offer that contemporary practices are not defining themselves against a singular position, rather they are developing a situational stance, a tactical response to specific contexts dependent on the debit and balance of constraints and opportunities. The discourses and conflicts that characterize the previous periods have been distributed and internalized, ingested into the design process itself. This project that I'm showing, we call it the EcoPods, is for a site in Boston that had become vacant, the victim of the economic crisis. Our theory was that architecture had become too cumbersome, unable to react quickly to the changes within markets, financing, approvals, and politics. Our proposal was to fill the void with an agile and provisional architecture made up of an armature of cells. The cells aggregate to form a packed solid and are deployed on the site by a large robotic arm. The cells, we proposed, would house an algae bioreactor for producing ethanol. The robotic arm is designed to configure the cells to optimize their solar exposure and to create a perpetual bloom cycle. The EcoPods proposes to use prefabricated modular structure to generate energy locally on a site that's currently unproductive, to promote a public consciousness about energy and the city. Energy is produced and consumed in a performance of perpetual configuration and reconfiguration. Even as practices are not fighting a singular fight against a single enemy, they're also not performing for a singular audience of critics or historians. Design work today is produced for multiple audiences, in multiple contexts, and with multiple temporalities. The feedback loop for architectural production and criticism is collapsed. Before the first foundation is cast, it is already has a public presence on Flickr and Facebook. The bloggers and haters have voted well before the historians and the curators. It has a following before it has a retrospective. It is always already posted, commented, liked, forwarded, tweeted, and tweaked. The robotic arm in this image, the image of automation, appearing in the multiple contexts from the cranes of the 1960s to the CAD/CAM studio of today. Contemporary design does not happen in a vacuum, but rather in a dense atmosphere of references. We are working within the context of multiple and overlapping histories. These histories are diffuse and pervasive, appearing at times almost invisible. The zeitgeist, the spirit of the age, is all around us, but the age is awash in references and temporalities, some historical, some contemporary, and some anticipating possible futures. Against this framework, I'd like to present our work as an illustration as a type of self-conscious situational practice. Interlaced in the presentation are a number of historical and contemporary references, the vapor of history. Like visual footnotes, these images present an alternate context for the work. The hope is that the shuffle from content and context will produce a deeper understanding of the work and shed some light on its potential meanings and methodologies, developing sub-narratives embedded within the presentation. In the context where history has been erased and rewritten, China has proved to be a remarkable testing ground for contemporary architecture. Explosive economic development and an insatiable appetite for images of progress has created an arms race of architectural form. Post-Olympics and post-Expo, China has choreographed buildings and spectacles, and even the weather, to create the camera-ready scenes flickering across the collective retina of a global television spectatorship. The demands of imaging and the mechanisms of authority have called on architecture to deliver new icons for a highly choreographed urban imaginary, icons drawn upon varied sources to produce narratives of continuity, as in the case of the Jinmao building on the right. The Mori building, on the other hand, avoided easy references in favor of abstraction. Originally designed with a circular opening, it was interpreted as a rising sun of the Japanese flag. The arithmetic of meaning, Japanese developer, circular opening, China equals rising sun. The project was halted until the oculus was changed into a square. So design practices working within these loaded cultural contexts require a particular agility, a sensitivity, even a diplomacy. This is a proposal for a pair of residential towers in Shanghai. As residential towers, the key element of design is the residential unit, which is here manifested as the balcony. In this case, the balcony is a single blinder to orient the views and maintain privacy. The towers sit on a podium of retail and common spaces. The facade is a pattern of balconies, one balcony per unit. The diversity of the unit mix is the innovation here. Instead of 320 repetitive units, we offer a range of unit sizes and types, varying the mix as it rises up the towers. Each floor is packed with a different number of residential units. So at the bottom, 10, 11, 12, and so on. The oblique views of the tower show the units tapering at the corners. This is a result of the unit packing. The pattern of balconies creates the impression of an aggregation of modular forms, similar to a stacking of bricks. The overall tower plans show the variety of building footprints. From a real estate point of view, the diversity of residential product allows the developer to capture all the segments of the market. It also targets a middle-class buyer that is conscious of lifestyles and looking for differentiation. The aggregation of packing logics generate both the facade pattern and the building massing. The bow in the facade is not a willful gesture of carving or subtracting. Rather, it is the outcome of an aggregation of varied units, a completely bottom-up strategy. This next project is for a developer in Chengdu, China. We were asked to participate in the design of a 20,000 square foot corporate retreat in Chengdu. When they asked us, we accepted. The only conditions were it had to have a sloped roof and it had to be a Chinese courtyard house. We asked for clarification and we were told it must have Chinese feeling. The client sent us a poem by the Tang poet Li Bai for inspiration. Now, the Chinese relationship to history is complex. 4,000 years of culture, 10 years of Cultural Revolution, and almost 60 years of Communist Party rule. The Cultural Revolution of the 1960s created a deep suspicion of the past, smashing the bourgeois artifacts and the persecution of individuals with sympathies for the past, created a tremendous gulf in the Chinese cultural memory, a forceful and hysterical amnesia. Then Deng's One Country, Two Systems speech in 1983 unleashed a period of rapid economic expansion and created an unprecedented wave of construction and destruction. The current economic boom in China has produced a profound ambivalence towards contemporary architecture and cultural identity, simultaneously producing the CCTV and the China Expo Pavilion. Even Herzog and de Meuron's bird's nest flickers between the crafted and the contemporary, the local and the imported. For an emerging Chinese upper class, access to history is a privilege. It's a means of differentiation. Given the radical historical discontinuities in China, recuperating the past has an entirely different valence than it does in North America. So our client for this project insisted that it be a Chinese courtyard house. We designed an interpretation of the courtyard house, a mat building with office and meeting spaces packed around a series of courtyards. Inverted pyramid geometries created a series of sloped roofs locally, but a flat roof overall. This was the site plan they sent us, which we thought was an axonometric, but it's actually a plan. The site G was our parcel. All the parcels interlock, and so 7 young architects were sort of playing this game with this parallelogram grid, trying to make contemporary Chinese courtyard houses. Our plan took the placking logic of the courtyard surrounded by program and distorted it into the irregular shaped parcel. Our scheme in the joint site model, where a group of young Chinese architects were positioning various interpretations of the courtyard house. It's our scheme at the top. This was a conceptual model, sort of packing the fixed perimeter with these different courtyards. After the first round, our scheme was judged to not have enough Chinese feeling. We were sent back to the drawing board. So the scheme evolved to reduce the number of cells and simplify the geometry. We introduced a sloped roof, actually by sort of twisting a series of gables, so peaks and valleys were inverted. We thought we could use the sort of traditional tile as a technology to sort of resolve the kind of twisting or warping within the high power roof surfaces. The tolerance would be taken up between each tile. During the design process, schedules shifted, programs evolved, and contexts were dramatically reinvented. Recently, the client has informed us that the site had been changed. Our building plan had been mirrored. The program had been changed to a restaurant. And that construction had already begun. So we rushed to accommodate the new site conditions and reconfigure the building to house the new program. The facade was made up of local bricks laid with a regular orientation throughout the site, so walls built on diagonals become sawtoothed and textured. You can see, orthogonal walls are smooth, obliques are textured. The windows form a composition of packed indentations, creating a series of taut frames within the rough backdrop of the brick wall. These were originally detailed in wood to provide a contrast to the brick. The client visited the expo and came back and proposed to make it out of Corten steel. There's a play between references and resources. Building in China, there's an access to local labor and materials that create opportunities not available elsewhere. Speaking with a local Chengdu architect, he told me that masonry is so abundant and plywood so expensive that he sometimes builds masonry walls as permanent formwork for concrete frame buildings. In addition, the local building materials and building traditions, there are contemporary issues of modular structures, aggregation, bottom-up processes, variation, and repetition. So presenting this work in an interlaced format, I hope to present a visual context for the work, drawing on the collective historic archive of contemporary projects, Archigram, Kurokawa, Paul Rudolph, Francois Roche, Mancia Tugnon, and Office Da. These represent a cloud of history that envelops the design process. The risk here, though, is that the references may detract from the content and overwhelm the work. The fog may be too thick, the anxiety of influence too strong. The work may lose its aura of originality, diluted in a promiscuity of references. On the other hand, the parallax between project and precedent may open up new avenues for interpretation and also for design. In conclusion, we found that within our practice, architectural history is less a receptacle of canonical works or legitimizing authority, but rather a self-conscious design methodology for work in real time, one that acknowledges the information-dense context in which we live and offers new analytical and projective capacities for design. If asked about our attitudes towards the 1960s, I would say yes, we did inhale. Thank you.